last year I had introduced, we're going to be talking about several things today. We're going to be talking a little bit about diet as it relates to your GI symptoms. And so Dr. Khanna actually set me up nicely because he introduced this idea of a low FODMAPs diet. And I want to give you a couple of techniques and strategies if that's something you're interested in using. But last year I had a chance to introduce some nutrition research that we started doing here within our GI division. And I see a couple friendly faces here who were kind enough to help participate in our research. I wanted to show you just a few things that we found from that. We're going to be working on putting some papers out there. I think one of the things that you all know and live, and we are really trying to get out into the Scleroderma GI world, is that nutrition has to be part of this interdisciplinary care that we give to people. So, we know that you see lots of specialists, pulmonary, GI, but we know that nutrition has to be woven in there somewhere, because we know that the GI complication rates in our patients are so high, and everybody has a nutrition concern. And that has to be individualized and has to be kind of woven in, so I'll show you some of that. Let's see. Let me just make sure I know how to advance this. I'll use the keyboard. There you go. So these are some of the topics which we're going to be covering today. And the one that is directly from our study is a little bit of information for you on supplements and kind of what we recommend that are unique to scleroderma. We're also going to be talking a little bit about keeping your muscle mass and some things that we've learned that we can do to accomplish that. So the first question that I want to go through is a lot of my patients will ask me, what should I eat? And I think there's a lot of ways to have a healthy diet. Let me put it that way. I have some clients that don't do a lot of carbohydrates. I have other clients that are vegetarian. And there's no one right diet for you with scleroderma. There are some things that we like to make sure all of our patients are doing. And we'll talk about pieces of that as we continue on with our discussion today. But one thing that we're really kind of interested in that we're looking at, because we see it a lot in our cardiovascular disease patients, is trying to weave in more elements of what we call a Mediterranean diet. So some of you may be very well versed in this already. You may have read a lot about it. But a Mediterranean diet basically means that we're doing more plant-based foods, more plant-based oils as opposed to animal products, and that we're getting in more fruits and vegetables. Now, I think the GI nutrition spin that we have to really customize for many of our patients with scleroderma is that we need to make sure that that's texture appropriate. So I would, my patients that are having a lot of bloating or difficulty chewing or swallowing, I would never want you to sit down with a bowl of bean chili and a big salad, but there's lots of ways that we could get beans and lentils into. We can puree them, we can add in bean flours into your baking. We can also do a lot of cooked vegetables and vegetable purees and smoothies. So there's a lot of kind of tricks up our sleeve to make sure you're getting healthy food, but in a modified texture. So one of the themes I think that I've really heard from a lot of the speakers today is this idea of inflammation. And we do not have a really great understanding in scleroderma or other autoimmune disorders of how diet directly influences inflammation. We know from our diabetic patients, we know from our heart disease patients, that a Mediterranean-style diet that has more plant-based food does seem to improve how well our blood vessels function and reduces that overall inflammation. So there's probably more research coming on this. So what we know about diet and inflammation, to some degree, we're kind of borrowing from what we know in the diabetes and kind of heart disease world. So another way of looking at it, if you're looking at a Mediterranean pyramid, so to speak, is that the base of your diet, we want to kind of include more fruits and vegetables, more healthy oils. The one study that we did here, which I'll introduce you to in a minute, we had our patients using olive oil as a way to add calories into their diet. And we didn't have people cook with it quite so much as we had people layer it onto their food once it's already cooked. So when you eat olive oil or other plant-based oils when they're cold like that, you actually retain some of the most anti-inflammatory properties to those foods. And for our patients that are always behind on calories, adding these heart-healthy oils is a great way to play catch-up with calories because they're very volume restricted. So a tablespoon of olive oil is about 120 calories, and you can layer that into your meals very nicely, have a very good cardiovascular benefit, but yet it doesn't take up much space in your stomach. For some of my clients who need to focus on losing weight, not gaining weight, what we really focus on is portion control. So we love to have people kind of visualize their plate. So this is specific to those of you who want to lose weight. And we have you split your plate in half. And half of your plate, we would have you fill up with fruits and vegetables. If you have GI issues, just modify the textures. Instead of having a raw salad, have vegetable soup. Have cooked microwave vegetables. In the winter months, especially in the Midwest, frozen vegetables are arguably more nutritious than fresh. So there's no loss of nutrition for you buying frozen vegetables that you throw in the microwave and add to your meal. And then the other half of your plate, we like you to split up between whatever your whole grain is. Again, that doesn't have to be cardboard. You don't have to go for the highest fiber grain that you can find. But you can integrate some whole grains there, like brown rice or a brown rice pasta. You can certainly do root vegetables like baked potato or sweet potato that has a really high nutrient content. And then the other quarter of your plate would be some type of lean protein. So a great way to nail the portion control without you having to bother with measuring cups and spoons. So we often talk about whole grains. Some of my patients will ask me, how do they know they're eating whole grain? Cheerios is a good one, but I'm not pushing Cheerios. But what I do want to show you on the label is the way that you tell that it's a whole grain is you look at the first ingredient. And in Cheerios, the first ingredient happens to be oats, but this could be the same thing for rice or for wheat or any other grain you're talking about. But what you want to see is that the first ingredient is the grain itself. So here it says whole grain oats. It could say whole grain brown rice. That's how you know you're getting a whole grain. The reason why that even matters is that whole grains have the most magnesium, they have the most selenium, the most nutrient density. Once they've been kind of polished, they've been stripped of all the good stuff. So I realize some of you with your GI issues may not be able to do whole grains all the time, but where you can sneak them in the case of like cooked oats or something like a dry cereal like this is a great nutrient-dense choice for you. So this is a resource I wanted to make sure you have. I know you have it in print. But when we talk about heart-healthy fats, these are the fats we're talking about. So olive oil is the one that always comes to mind. But any nut oil, for that matter, or pureed nuts like almond butter or peanut butter, soy milk, these are all great heart-healthy choices. So you can be more liberal with these healthy fats, especially if you need calories. So I'd like to just show you a little bit of some of the results of the nutrition study that we did. And this was a kind of a shared project that we did through the American Dietetic Association with myself, our one gastroenterologist, Dr. Grano, and one of my nutrition colleagues who used to be here and is now at UIC, which is why you see the little UIC emblem there. So we ended up having 18 subjects total. And what we collected is we got lots of information from our patients about their GI symptoms. We actually used Dr. Khanna's GI symptom tracker. I told him I would share some of the results with him because we were able to see positive changes in our patients' GI symptoms by manipulating diet. So I'll tell you kind of how we did that. And we looked at quality of life. And then the other thing that we were really interested in looking at is muscle mass. So we looked at bone health. We did a DEXA scan, which is a bone density scan, and I'll show you what that looks like in just a minute. But we were looking at that scan not because we were so interested in bone health, but because we wanted to look at muscle. So one of the things that you may recognize, we see it a lot in our patients who have cancer. People who have cancer say, I got sick, I lost 10 pounds. I've gained the weight back. So my weight is the same, but what I've noticed is I've lost my butt muscle, or I've lost my leg muscles. I can't get out of a chair very easily. So what we're really interested in nutritionally is how do we keep that muscle? Because we know muscle is so important to our patients as they age. It also is a really important driver of metabolic rate. We also know that when you have lots and lots of inflammation, you kind of burn through your muscle faster. So this is a real emerging area of research for us nutritionally and also here at Northwestern. Dr. Varga has been really a great mentor to me, kind of looking at some of this research. So a little bit more about our research subjects. Our research subjects were a little on the lean side. Their BMI was 22. BMI is how your weight is distributed for your height. But that's normal. So one of the things that we want to argue is that we need more ways to evaluate the nutritional health of our patients other than just their weight for height. Because our patients looked kind of normal based on their BMI, but a lot of our patients were very lean, in fact, too lean. And I'll show you some of that in just a minute. So the term on the bottom is called sarcopenia, and that means a loss of muscle, and I'll come back to that in a few slides. The other thing that we looked at is we looked at vitamin levels, because we never want to just give people lots of individual vitamin supplements that maybe they don't need. We also think there's vitamins that our patients are taking that maybe they need even more of. So we looked at the North American Scleroderma Association. There was a group of kind of independent researchers, Dr. Varga was part of it, had gotten together to come up with consensus guidelines to say, this is how patients with scleroderma should be treated. And it was particular to nutrition. And what they suggested was checking these vitamin levels in the bloodstream. Check your patient's iron levels. So this is something we did on all of our patients, because we said, hey, these are the recommendations, but we realize not all centers are able to kind of execute this. So let's take a kind of a wellness check here and see how our patients are doing. So we checked things like serum zinc. We looked at iron levels. We looked at vitamin D. We looked at retinol, which is a measure of vitamin A. We looked at B12 and folic acid. And what we found is that, my little pointer here, right? What we found is that we were kind of shocked with this. None of our patients were deficient in B12 and folic acid like we thought people might be. Once we hit 50, we don't absorb B12 as well as we should. And if we're on acid blocking therapy, which almost all of our patients are on, we don't absorb B12 that well. So in the GI world, we love to look at B12 because it's a wellness check that we maintain for our patients. But none of our patients were deficient, probably because our patients' doctors are saying, take a multivitamin, so they're pretty covered there. However, about a third of our patients didn't have enough vitamin D in their blood, and were really very deficient. And more than 50% of our patients were very low in serum zinc. They were also low in iron. So what this, I know we only had 18 subjects, but what this kind of fortified with us is that when we're doing routine blood work, it's important to look at the nutritional blood health as well to really kind of customize or personalize some of the vitamin supplements that we recommend. Many of you are taking calcium and vitamin D already, which is outstanding. And some of our patients were, and yet when we looked at their vitamin D in their blood, we found that they needed even more. So it's a very simple thing that you can talk with your rheumatologist or gastroenterologist about. Next time you're having blood work, you can ask them if they can do kind of a nutritional check for you. Primary care can do it as well. You don't have to have these done all the time, but just to kind of make sure that we are staying on top of some easy nutrient levels like vitamin D, B12, iron, etc. So back to muscle and back to those bone scans. This is a copy of one of the bone scans that we would get. So anytime any of you have had a DEXA scan to look at bone health, it looks a little something like this. Ours was a little different because instead of doing just a regional scan like on your hip and spine, we did total body DEXA scans. And the reason why we did the total body DEXA scan is because, like I said, we really wanted to look at muscle. And we know you can't look at muscle if you're just looking at like the hip and the spine. You've got to do the total body. Well, the other very cool thing is not only do we get all this information about your muscle by region, but we also can estimate fat mass and muscle mass. And then we get this measure here, which is called appendicular mass or appendicular lean weight. And that is what determines how much muscle mass you have. So this individual patient, this was from a different study, not our scleroderma patients. This was where we were looking at body composition changes in women who have undergone breast cancer treatment. As an aside, women have a tendency to gain weight sometimes after breast cancer treatment. And what is emerging is that here in the colors you can see the bone is blue, the yellow is the fat area, and the red is the muscle. You can start to see how some of the yellow is kind of sneaking into the muscle there in the abdomen. We think that the muscle that's in the belly, or I'm sorry, when fat kind of deposits itself in the belly, we think of that now as more of like an organ, that it has the ability to really kind of churn up some of those inflammatory markers that that complicate diseases, not just scleroderma, but things like diabetes, heart disease, and cancer. So this is a very new area of research in scleroderma that other researchers are looking at, and we are just starting to look at this as well here at Northwestern, is to kind of understand body composition. Does it make disease course better or worse? We don't know. But I'll show you what we know about muscle. So let's talk about how we keep our muscle and what we found in our patients. This is when we talk about keeping our muscle, the first recommendation from the North American expert panel, as we mentioned before, is to check your weight monthly. If your weight goes down for any reason, or you feel like you've lost, you feel like saggier, as some of my patients will say, talk about it with your doctor. You could talk about it with your primary care, but certainly your rheumatologist or your gastroenterologist. You can work with a dietitian to improve your weight status. And one of the things that you may work on is getting some nutritional supplement, whether it's extra snacks or a homemade protein shake or a store-bought protein shake, to really kind of bump up the nutrients that are in your diet. And I'm going to give you some specific tips there. So the term that we like to use to describe muscle loss is a term called sarcopenia. And sarcopenia literally means this loss of functional muscle. And one of the things that I will tell you is that it actually happens naturally with age. So all of us with age experience age-related sarcopenic losses. So in the words of my very wise 76-year-old mother, she says, I'm just staying 29. So I think that's the way to do it. We can start to lose functional muscle in our 40s. And every decade, from 40 to 50, 50 to 60, and so forth, we do see a loss of muscle. The biggest way that our geriatric specialists tell us people lose muscle is they have a hard time getting out of a chair. And that can tell you you've lost some muscle in your legs and in your back, not just that your joints are creaky, and that people are more prone to falls. And so in an effort to kind of prevent that, everybody is really interested right now in looking at how we can conserve muscle and what we call functional strength. And one of the best ways to do that is to use the muscle and to optimize diet. So we'll talk a little bit about how to do that. So what I do want to just show you, just to kind of illustrate, this isn't unique to scleroderma, but with sarcopenia, you can see in a 21-year-old, this is a CT image of muscle, and you can see kind of the density of the muscle here and the kind of natural kind of layer of fat. You can see in a 63-year-old, and not all 63-year-olds have CT images like this, but you can see that loss of muscle, and you can see how much fat is starting to infiltrate the muscle. So it's not that we're trying to get people to lose fat. That's not as important. What's important is maintaining muscle, because when you lose muscle, you lose, again, your powerhouse. So there's a couple of ways that we can do this. One, we've got to optimize diet. And in a couple of slides, I've got some techniques to tell you how we can do that. One of the things we need to do, though, is to get more exercise. And prior to today, I've done a lot of digging for my clients and for my own kind of research interests. This is an area, I think, in scleroderma that has been really, I think, could use a lot of focus from our physical therapists and our exercise specialists. I think we need a lot of adaptive exercise for all of our chronic disease patients. There's a very cool exercise center at Rehab Institute of Chicago, and it is an adaptive gym. And I put the link, not to RIC Center, but under the title there's a great website with really fantastic YouTube videos. It is an adaptive exercise website that has adaptive exercise routines for people who are in a wheelchair or who have had a stroke or who have bad knees or hip replacements or have cerebral palsy. So there's lots of really great modified exercise techniques with videos that really show you how to use proper form and to stay healthy and to stay safe. But the thing that's great about, so the key term is adaptive exercise, because the last thing I want you to do is, if you have sclerodermas, go into a gym and feel like you got to hop on the treadmill and bang out some weights, and that's the technique to keeping your muscle. We know that you can actually do a great job of maintaining muscle mass using adaptive equipment like rubber bands, for example, that a physical therapist can give you, or using your own body weight to do squats against a wall, for example. But you need, if you have not formally had an exercise program, you need someone who can really show you proper form. It's a great thing to tap into a physical therapist or an occupational therapist for, and specifically ask them for strengthening exercises with adaptive modifications. And one of the wonderful things about working with physical therapy and occupational therapy is oftentimes that is covered under insurance. You can get your exercise protocol, and then you can start rolling that out at home or at a gym near your house. So for muscle maintenance, one of the things we see, which is in the third step there, is that we need about 6 different types of exercises, some for the upper body, some for the core and the trunk, and then some for our lower body. And we need the weights to be, or the pressure that we're putting our body weight on, we need about 8 to 12 reps. And doing that, several times a week is enough to really maintain some of those age-related and disease-related muscle loss that we sometimes see. So this is what I don't want for you. I don't want you to be so sore that you can't function. And this is, I want to make sure that everybody is taking it slow. I'd much rather you feel like you're ramping up slowly than that you overdid it and you have to back off. So let's talk about diet and how diet can help you maintain your muscle. So I want to be clear that it sounds like a semantics, just like a word play. I want to be clear that the difference here is I don't want everyone to feel like they need to be on a high protein diet, although some people may truly need more protein in their diets. The difference is that we need to distribute your protein in your diet. So the typical American has no protein at breakfast unless we're having, bacon and eggs. And then we might have some protein at lunch in the form of like a sandwich, but then most of us have all of our protein for dinner. So oftentimes clients will say to me, for dinner I eat, a meat, a starch, and a vegetable. Great, that's wonderful. What we can do is we can shrink our portion sizes of our protein, let's say at dinner if we want, and distribute them better throughout the day. Because we know that our muscles are actively using protein throughout the day to make themselves. And that when we go longer than 4 to 6 hours without having some protein, we really shortchange our muscles and our muscles' ability to grow themselves. Research in senior Americans has shown that well into our 70s and 80s, we still can synthesize and grow new muscle. But it requires kind of the right finesse of distributing the protein in your diet and having the right exercise program. So 20 to 30 grams of protein is ideal. And so I'll show you what that looks like here in the next slide. When I've talked about this with Dr. Varga, the first thing that he will say to me is, well, some of our clients have kidney issues. And our nephrologist will tell us, don't give patients with kidney issues too much protein. That's true. And that's why I want to say the goal is not for you to be on, like a muscle mass protein powder. The goal is that we start layering in protein at breakfast, we layer in protein at lunch, and we layer it in dinner. The other thing I want to say is that generally our patients don't have a problem getting too much protein. Our patients are not sitting down to, an 8-ounce steak at breakfast, lunch, and dinner. People are really, a lot of our patients get full fast and really take their time chewing and swallowing, and that kind of limits the volume of protein that people can eat at meals. So I don't usually see that it is an issue for our patients that we treat here. But here's some examples of what 20 grams of protein looks like, doable. Breakfast could be a Greek yogurt with some fruit, or you could have 2 scrambled eggs with some type of toast. You could also make a homemade protein shake. So one of our kind of smart patients who is here was telling me that she has been using a NutriBullet. You could use a blender, but a lot of our patients have really gotten into liking to make homemade smoothies and throwing in a little protein. I love that because one of the treatments for gastroparesis, which we'll talk about more in a minute as well, is we put things in liquid form as much as possible because liquids do not require stomach muscle action to empty. They rely often on gravity. So we try to really optimize what we can do in liquid form. And I will often tell people if you're making, a casserole for dinner, or you're making a soup of some sort, or a family dish, and you feel like it just might not sit well, if it's possible, blenderize it. If it's something savory, throw a little broth in with it. If it's something sweet, you can certainly make that into, some type of like a sweet smoothie. But liquid type textures are much easier to digest because they leave the stomach faster than solids and often will allow you to not feel so full for so long. So let's talk a little bit about some of these diet strategies to control GI symptoms that Dr. Khanna talked about. So we already talked a little bit about, cooking vegetables and peeling the skin on things. We don't want to give you out of control fiber if you are already feeling bloated, so it's fine to get fiber in your fruits and vegetables, but we don't want you to go out of your way to eat Raisin Bran and All Bran and things like that. That's only going to make your bloating worse. And then one of the things that we have been able to try, and we tried it in our MNC PASS research as well, is doing a low FODMAP diet in an effort to improve GI symptoms with our patients. So these are really very common GI symptoms that Dr. Khanna already identified, and I want to validate that and give you some strategies for dealing with those. When my patients tell me they feel full fast or they feel early and that really limits their ability to eat a full meal, one of the things that we often do is shrink the portion size of the meal. Now, that means you're cutting your calories. So in an effort to prevent you from losing weight, you've got to eat more often. And I know that sometimes that can feel oppressive. So one of the suggestions Dr. Khanna had said, and I really think it's a fantastic suggestion, if you can only eat half of a sandwich, that's fine. But that might mean an hour or 2 hours later, you've got to eat the other half. So I want you to, if you are a person who struggles with early fullness, besides doing liquids, I want you to kind of get out of the American way of thinking that you should eat, breakfast at 8 o'clock, lunch at noon, and dinner at 6 o'clock. It's very appropriate for you to be eating every hour, 2 or 3, depending on how small your last meal was. So the next thing that you can do, and this certainly can be customized much better, but to give you an idea of what do small frequent meals look like, what do little mini meals look like, this was something that I developed for a client of mine who had really bad gastroparesis. Now, you might not need something that's quite so texture modified, but we'd love to do hot cereals, things like cream of wheat or really well-cooked oats or cream of rice or grits or things like that. And then, if you are bloated, we'll talk about doing a lactose-free milk, but you can certainly do a lactose-free milk, regular milk, kefir, whatever you can tolerate. But then notice that maybe about 2 to 3 hours later, we're having a snack. We love to do fruits with some type of protein. This banana with 2 tablespoons of a creamy nut butter is 300 calories, which is about the same calories that's in an Ensure Plus. So I love for people to do liquid supplements when it works for them, but if you feel like you have a good appetite and that's an easy snack for you to do, I love to integrate kind of real mini meals into your game plan. So if we shift gears and look at the low FODMAPs diet. So he has a slide in one of his slide deck, Dr. Khanna, that shows you what FODMAP stands for. And it is an acronym that stands for all these different sugars that are not well absorbed in the small intestine. So there's fructose, there's oligosaccharides, which are commonly found in milk sugars. The P in FODMAPs is polyols, and those are like sugar substitutes or sugar alcohols. You'll always see those found in diet foods. They go under the names like sorbitol, mannitol, xylitol. So what we know for sure, and this started with just studying IBS, and we've been able to kind of roll this out into other GI issues. When our patients are feeling bloated, or specifically when they have a lot of gas, distension, and diarrhea, that a low FODMAPs diet works very well. And so what we're doing is we're not necessarily taking foods out, but we're shrinking the portion size and we're swapping things around. So we don't want you to take fruit out of your diet, but we want you to play up these low fructose versions as opposed to these kind of higher fructose versions. Now, portion size matters. So if you are saying to me, I had a couple slices of cooked apple on my chicken breast, or that was cooked in like a pork loin, that's not going to really bother you. What we're talking about with limiting apples, for example, is if you would normally have a raw apple on an empty stomach in the afternoon as a snack. That's going to make your bloating worse. So small amounts of it kind of added to a whole mixed meal, I suspect you can get away with. The other thing that I want to kind of emphasize here is lactose. Lactose, which is milk sugar, always makes diarrhea and bloating worse. And some people say, well, I'm lactose intolerant. Other clients of mine will say, well, how do you know? Well, rather than testing you for it, which is a pretty lengthy breath test, what we tell people is try it. Do a lactose-free version, see how you feel. Up at the top are high lactose products, regular milk, ice cream, regular yogurt. By soft cheeses, we mean things like cottage cheese. Down here, you can get a lactose-free milk and a lactose-free yogurt, and you're fine. So you don't have to take it out of your diet. You've just got to make a swap. And then hard cheeses, like if you were going to do an ounce of cheddar cheese or mozzarella cheese or Swiss, fine. That has very, very little lactose. So does butter, very little lactose. So there's some small changes that we can make and tweaks that we can make to really decrease some of the bloating and the distension that our patients are feeling. It can be a very healthy diet, but it does take some kind of pre-planning. And the biggest thing that I see with a low FODMAPs diet is that our patients sometimes undercut themselves on calories. So I think you have to be really diligent. If you're taking something out, you've got to have a really good replacement for it. And also we need to make sure that we're doing a very good job of layering snacks into your diet. So just a few other strategies to make sure that your diet is kind of well-rounded and healthy. I always love to have people focus on weekend batch cooking and kind of making things ahead of time. And Some of our clients will say that they'll spend the weekends making soup and dicing up vegetables for the week that they might, puree. We might make a bunch of smoothies on the weekend and stick them in little, containers in the freezer so that you can take them out and kind of eat them like ice cream when you have to kind of run. Or let them thaw all the way to room temperature so they're not too cold to handle, and then, enjoy them. I like to say this often, and it's worth repeating, that it's fair to kind of change our expectation of a healthy meal. I think sometimes as dietitians, we make people feel that, the perfect balanced meal is, the piece of salmon, the superfood greens at dinner, the quinoa or the kale, right? The whole grain pasta at dinner. And those are great choices, but you realistically can't cook like that all the time. And when you're tired, it just may not be possible. So if you have really great energy in the beginning of the day and you feel like you can saute vegetables and cook a piece of fish for breakfast, and at dinner you want to do scrambled eggs and a bowl of cereal, that's great. Your body doesn't care if you eat fish at 7 in the morning or 7 at night. It's protein. It may not be what your taste buds like, but your stomach does not mind. So my kids try to use that against me when they lobby to eat pizza for breakfast. I also like for people to focus on meal assembly. So there's nothing wrong with you stopping at the grocery store and getting a rotisserie chicken, and then you are cooking your own vegetables or making your own side dish of pasta or adding in your own soup. There's also nothing wrong with, I have one client that has a really great restaurant that knows her well, and she lets them cook her protein for her. She's like, I live by myself, I have limited time. She's like, I can't be bothered cooking, fish or chicken or things like that. I will fill in the blanks and let them do the cooking. You can make modifications. You can ask a restaurant to make it without added salt or with very little oil. You can ask for some of those basic modifications so it really feels more like homemade food. So I love for people to eat at home and not dine out quite so much. However, I think one of the things that we have to be very respectful of is the amount of energy that you have. And I'd rather have you feel like you are getting the protein in that you need, getting some of the fruits and vegetables in and the textures that you need, and not that your nutrition is just zapping your energy because it took so much time to prepare the food. And then the last thing that I will mention is, again, getting back to those modified textures, our GI motility has a tendency to decline as the day goes on. So the real traditional European way of doing it is eating your main meal in the middle of the day and then having something lighter for breakfast. I don't think you need to have something lighter for breakfast, or for dinner rather, but what you might consider is having a solid meal in the middle of the day or in the morning, the fish and the vegetable example. But for dinner, there's nothing wrong with you doing a protein shake or a fruit and yogurt shake that you throw into a blender and you have that with a couple of crackers or some other snacks. Because those liquid meals, those modified textures, are going to leave your stomach a lot sooner than solids. So if you find that you don't eat a lot during the day and you get home at night and you're eating your family dinner and it's solid food, and then you're feeling like it really flares your reflux or it really flares your distension, swap the order of things. So these are just a few techniques to help improve your GI symptoms.